Welcome back on the AM show. My name is Benjamin Akakpo, and these, what I'm about to share with you next, are my blunt thoughts. Unfiltered. They are what they are. And I've titled them today, Bloodletting the State for Individual Gain. How our misleaders have left us in the lurch. Bloodletting the state for individual gain. How our misleaders have left us in the lurch. Today I'll talk about two crucial matters, Cocot and what is happening there in the IMF program, together with a host of state-owned enterprises and where they've ended up vis-a-vis our IMF package. And I'll also look at that infamous Trafigura scandal that has now saddled us as a country with a $140 million debt. But who benefits? And why do we always end up with these judgment debts? What's going on? Bloodletting. It's a bit of a phenomenon. In ancient times, they would even use leeches and stuff to get blood out of people surgically. At other times, it also had to do with, mass killings and all of that. I chose that word specifically because of our misleadership and how they bleed us dry as a people. They get the debt, they incur the debt, we pay, the ordinary taxpayers, who can't even afford 3 square meals in a day. Well, let's come to the board. Let's start with Cocot. Cocot's financial oversight. Now, in recent times, we've heard from Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta, who has said both the governor of the central bank, Dr. Ernest Addison, and the Minister of Finance will now be on the board, as though it were a novelty. We're also setting up a desk at the Finance Ministry that will interact with the Finance Division of Cocot to make sure the issues of fertilizers, cocoa roads, and all are brought into an ambit of discipline. But really, is that the case? Have these entities not had representation on the board of Cocot? What is this going to change? Or are we merely dancing to the tune of the IMF? And in terms of discipline, how has the Finance Ministry itself been disciplined? We all know the tale of the tape, to the point where there were people who were receiving salaries who were not even working at this ministry, but were being paid salaries. Let's go to the next slide. Now, what government told the IMF is what you see here. We'll publish a turnaround strategy approved by Cabinet for Cocot by end of June 2023. It will include an immediate announcement of joint ministerial supervision of Cocot by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture, and we will phase out quasi-fiscal spending of the board, and this would require announcement of termination of the road concession agreement with the Ministry of Roads and discontinuation or rationalization of fertilizer input subsidy programs, including high-tech. Next slide. Let's get into the next slide. Then we look at the corporate governance structure of Cocot. It has a board of directors appointed by the government and governs Cocot, and it is composed of government nominees from various professions, including a representative of the workers of Cocot, 2 representatives of the Cocoa, Coffee and Shea Nut Farmers Association, Cocoshi as we call them. Ministerial responsibility is exercised by the Minister of Food and Agriculture and a finance minister and governor of the central bank. They have always had representation on the board. So why paint the picture as though something radically different were happening and that we were now going to make these moves to streamline and everything? You knew. But we'll get to the losses, and then you realize what the tale of the tape is. Next slide. Now, you look at the IMF program and the 8 SOEs, state-owned enterprises, identified as being exposed to substantial financial risk. You look at some of those that have been giving us issues in recent times. For example, the ECG, we're talking about them today, the Ghana Water Company Limited, the VRA in the mix as well. It appears our energy sector is in quite a state. Cocot is there, TOR, GNPC, Ghana Gas, bust. I find it so worrying because many of these entities are in our power supply chain, energy supply chain, and they are wobbling. And as for Boston, the rest, we can still purchase the iPhones at the prices we are purchasing them, even in the state of our economy. Next slide. Now, then you come back to the fund, okay? And Cocot has accumulated annual losses for many years on the back of, this is what they told us, high rollover cost of outstanding cocoa bills, high purchase price to cocoa producers compared to its operational costs and elevated quasi-fiscal operations, that is, fertilizer provision, rural roads development. But what do? Do we cut these off, and what will be the consequences for that sector? Next slide. Let's look at the trajectory, though, in terms of the statement of financial performance between 2012 and 2021, about a 9-year period, as far as Cocot is concerned. And the source, by the way, is the Auditor General's report and estimates from Ghana's IMF program. So you look at the figures in billions of cedis, and you would see a negative trend. In 2012, negative 0.09, 2013, negative 1.2, and then there is some betterment in 2014. Again, in 2015, there's a bit of a dip, but still in the positive. Then we slide into negatives all the way till now. Negative 0.19, negative 0.39, all the way to 2021, negative 2.4, one of the worst we've ever seen. This is the performance of the institution we're talking about. This is their performance. Next slide. Then you look at the loans they have protracted within that same period. Now, in 2012, in billions of cedis, 11 billion. 2013, 12.1. It came down a bit to 10 billion in 2014, fell to 9.8, 7.8 billion in 2016, and it's been on the rise ever since. As of 2021, 19 billion cedis. Yet, that institution is still bleeding dry. Let's go to the next slide. Then you look at phasing out the quasi-fiscal activities, the cocoa farmers' dilemma. There's fertilizer provision, like I was mentioning. Are you going to cut that off? Are you going to take away the rural roads development or the mass spraying of cocoa farms, providing high-yield seedlings to farmers, rehabilitation of cocoa roads? Which one are you going to cut out? And what will be the impact? But we only hear because of the irresponsibility that has continued ad infinitum, like a fan belt. These should not be touched, but now the proposals are to touch them because of misleadership, lack of fiscal discipline. So the finance ministry shouldn't come and be painting a picture as though they were not in the know. They were from day one. Next slide. Now I want us to move from the Cocot situation and segue neatly into another issue that is a grave matter of concern, because while we've bled with Cocot and a lot of our SOEs, here too we're bleeding. So what is the Trafigura deal all about? Let's break it down for you. The 26th of January 2021, the GPGC, a majority-owned Trafigura entity, obtained a final award in its favor against the government of Ghana in arbitral proceedings in England. The award was for approximately $140 million. Think of that. Quantify it in the sense of how much we are getting from the IMF, even in the second tranche. That is over 1/6 of that figure. Now, it arose out of a written agreement for the installation and operation of 2 power plants, which Ghana, as the tribunal found, had unlawfully terminated prior to the expiry of the contractual term. I've heard Boakye Jarko speak, listened to watched what he has had to say, followed his statement and all of that. It's interesting how we try to distance ourselves from these, because if you're a leader and these things happen, I don't know, we always try to pass the buck. Who takes responsibility? Next slide. But in terms of the recent developments, even before we get to the other historical antecedents, May 24, 2023, Trafigura received an email from White & Case stating that it expected to receive instructions to act for Ghana and seeking to agree on a revised timetable in relation to its applications. Then, June 2023, Ghana issued an application to set aside the order. This order was subsequently dismissed. 21st July, Ghana filed the objections it wished to raise in relation to making the ICOs final, and in August, Trafigura made an application for a receivership order in relation to Ghana's leasehold interest in one of the London properties, Regina House, whichever way you want to put it. Next slide. And then we go back to the historical antecedents I spoke about, which now have left us with this albatross round our necks. 2015, February. The GPGC entered into negotiations with the government of Ghana for the provision of a fast-track power generation solution. You know what was happening at the time and why we needed some of these. Then the 21st of May, the VRA issued an excavation permit to the entity for the Abuaze site. The 3rd of June, parties executed the EPA. Then in July, Parliament ratified the EPA, and in April, the GPGC executed a contract to dismantle the water plant in Italy, and work to dismantle the Gorizia plant commenced. Then we go to the next slide. Then in 2017 and beyond, here's what happened, which has led us here. The VRA informed the GPGC that it had, quote, decided not to proceed with the leasing of the land for the project. This was where our woes began. And then in April, news reports emerged that the new administration was taking steps to review and to terminate existing PPAs entered into by the previous government. Next slide. So you look at the trajectory then from the 28th of August 2017, the AG's advice at the time versus what advice was given currently. 4 PPAs with a combined capacity of 1,810 megawatts should be deferred until 2018 to 2025. The 3 PPAs with a combined capacity of that should be deferred beyond 2025. And the 11 PPAs with a combined capacity of 2,808 megawatts, among them the GPGC EPA, should be terminated. And the project would result in costs of $115 million plus if implemented with its attendant high tariffs. Next slide. Then the basis of that position had to do with the illegality for want of capacity to enter into a PPA, failure to obtain siting and construction permits, installation of used plant contrary to policy. So they said it was used, it wasn't new. And then failure on the part of the GPGC to fulfill its CPs and other conditions subsequent. Some have asked whether these were enough to go down that road. Next slide. And then, getting ready to wrap the conversation, the basis for the AG's understanding of the position were these. If this agreement was terminated by the GPGC due to the government of Ghana's breach of its obligations under the agreement, or the government of Ghana's default, or the government of Ghana terminated the agreement contrary to the provisions of the agreement, that the government of Ghana would have to pay an early termination fee of an amount equal to capital recovery charges multiplied by the amount of energy the GPGC equipment would have produced. And then, if the GPGC equipment continued to operate at the guaranteed capacity for the remaining term, the early termination payment up to a maximum of 24 months within 90 days after issuing of the termination notice by the GPGC. And this was how we found ourselves where we do now. In the lurch, because the decisions, and that is what boggles my mind sometimes. We make these decisions, and you ask yourself, the stories we've been hearing about some judgment debts brought to bear intentionally because someone is going to round the bend and line his or her pocket. Is that what is happening? I don't know. I'll leave it to you to read between the lines. But we've had judgment debt upon judgment debt, from NDC to NPP, and NPP back to NDC. What is going on? If we were to tally the number of judgment debts we have suffered as a country, and what it has cost us, believe you me, we wouldn't need the sort of money we're taking from the IMF, the drop in the bucket, the paltry sums we're getting from them. But we've come to our knees as a country because of these misleaders. Ghana 4. If we continue on this trajectory, there may be a point where there will be no Ghana, because we would have incurred so much debt that future generations will have nothing. Let us be wise. Let us wake up. Let us smell the coffee that is brewing, percolating. Because if we don't get our actions right, and we allow misleaders, like we've seen with Cocot, like we've seen now with the hypocrisy of the IMF transactions and what we claim have been happening when we had oversight responsibility, like we've seen with Trafigura, where now we are going to lose some $140 million. If we don't get our act together, only God knows what will happen to us, not even to talk of future generations, posterity. I share my thoughts on some of these matters because I love Ghana. Ghana is the only home we have, and we must protect it and defend it. I do this for God and country. My name is Benjamin Akakpo, and these are my blunt thoughts shared with you, raw, hot, unedited, undiluted. Speak up to the misleaders and call them to order. Thank you for watching.